Okay, excellent. So, as others have mentioned today, kind of the purpose of this research day, hopefully, is to depart from typical research conferences or scientific conferences and present either the findings or a little bit more about the projects that each of us are working on in a really applicable kind of understandable context. So that is what I'm going to aim for today, and telling you a little bit about the project that we've been working on over at The Ohio State University. And you might be wondering, well, what are they doing over at OSU that has to do with New Jersey? And I'll be sharing a little bit more about our project as we go. So the name of our project is Exploring Experiences, Attitudes, and Practices of Firearms Among Women Gun Owners in New Jersey and Ohio. And we're doing that for a couple of reasons. The first, because this is a project sponsored and funded by the New Jersey Gun Violence Research Center. But I hold a connection to both New Jersey and Ohio as a women gun owner, or a woman gun owner, identifying as a woman gun owner. So this is coming out of cultivated lived experience as being a woman who also owns a gun, and learning more about the lived experience of these women so that it can hopefully inform secure storage practices and suicide prevention practices. Now, before I go to my next slide, I could not have presented any of this today without the assistance of the team, the WGO team. But I have to give Jared a shout out because he did a remarkable professional job on creating these slides. So give Jared a big virtual round of applause. He's here attending, so you can give him some kudos when you see how awesome these slides are. This is the part I'm going to move quickly through. You've heard quite a bit about this already from presenters today. We know that over half of suicide deaths involve firearms, and it's because firearms are incredibly lethal. If somebody attempts suicide using a firearm, it's fatal 9 out of 10 times, if not more. We also are likely, and perhaps we're familiar, that a good proportion of suicide deaths involving firearms are men. We know that men are more likely compared to women to use firearms other than lethal means. However, guns are accounting for about a third of suicide deaths among women, and they're the leading method of suicide among female veterans. We're also noticing that within the past several, I would say 2 decades, the rates by which women are dying by suicide involving firearms is growing considerably. Again, as other presenters and folks have shared, we also know there's an association between firearm access and how it's associated with increased risk of injury, both accidental and intentional. Owning a firearm is not iatrogenic in terms of developing suicide risk. Rather, it increases the risk of dying because firearms are so lethal. Firearms do not cause somebody to consider suicide or to think of suicide or become suicidal. We also know through research that firearms means counseling, or lethal means counseling, and firearms means safety counseling and safe storage practices, which are imparted and covered as part of lethal means counseling. They're strongly associated with reduced suicide risk. Last distinctions I want to be sure to highlight is we're noticing there's an association between suicide deaths in using firearms in states with less restrictive gun laws and policies. Over the past, from 2010 to 2021, we noticed that 4 times as many women died by suicide using a firearm in Ohio compared to New Jersey. Now, why does this matter? I've already articulated that we're noticing that more women are dying by suicide using firearms in recent years. Over the past several years, there has been a significant increase. But I also thought, as this is a group of folks that we've not done a ton of research around, why not do a little exploring of my own? And as somebody, though I share that I am a gun owner, I haven't always been a gun owner. And so this was something that came to me very recently, and for very many different reasons, which informed me learning more about guns and actually purchasing my own gun, and then actually purchasing another gun. So what? I think it's really critical also that we examine these experiences knowing that we might not actually know what these unique characteristics are based on research that's predominantly been done among men or among service members. So this is what we decided on. Our aims were to first, we wanted to see if there were features of the experiences, attitudes, and practices of women gun owners that influence safe storage practices. Are they reporting different reasons that inform how and why they store their guns in a certain way? The second aim we had was to see if there are associations, again, among these practices or experiences and attitudes of women gun owners between women gun owners in New Jersey and Ohio based on their respective firearm policies. Now, New Jersey and Ohio are in some ways kind of on different ends of the spectrum. Dr. Dariwala had spoken about this in her breakout session, in that policies look really different. Ohio, we just got rid of a provision in which it required folks to go through a 6 to 8 hour training before getting their CCW, or a concealed carry of a weapon. So when I went through and I got my CCW, I had to take a 6 hour class and then had 2 hours on the range practicing. First time I shot a revolver. But I also learned about safe storage practices. I learned about transporting a firearm between states, what is allowed, what's not allowed. But I learned more about different resources that were available to me to learn more about being a responsible gun owner. In New Jersey, desperately, and these are just brief examples, by the way, this is not by any means an exhaustive or extensive list of the differences in legislation around firearms, but New Jersey, it's quite uncommon for somebody to conceal carry their firearm, and in fact, it takes quite a lengthy process to get that provision, and very few people do so. So here's a little bit more about our team. So as I mentioned, Jared is the wonderful creator of this PowerPoint, and also pretty much in charge of running the day-to-day operations of the study. Both Sarah and Sam conduct some of our interviews as part of research procedures, which I'll talk about a little bit more on the next slide. And then Dr. Craig Bryan serves as the multiple principal investigator on the project. And then that last little co-author in the middle is sleeping on the floor over there. So, as I mentioned, there's this really unique experience, these are unique experiences that we can explore between women gun owners in New Jersey and Ohio. So we took a qualitative approach. Qualitative research has been done to better understand suicide risk among firearm owners. And yet, this is, to the best of our knowledge, the first examination that really looks at key features of women gun owners that aren't veterans, who aren't service members, but also looking at broader experiences outside of the realm of suicide prevention. So the first thing we do is an eligibility screen. We want to ensure that if folks say they own guns, they actually do own guns. And we've been really fortunate, not only with the work that Jared has done in conducting those screenings, but support from other entities here at the Ohio State to ensure that our recruitment and retention is strong. We administer a couple of questionnaires at the baseline assessment. It's also where we're getting some identity characteristics in terms of race, ethnicity, gender identity, so folks can identify as trans and as a woman. We also are getting a firearm ownership timeline. When was the first time you fired a gun or you shot a gun? When did you get your first gun? We're also looking at and using the primary care screen for PTSD for the DSM-5, just almost in an exploratory function. Another paper or project that a number of us are working on is looking at the moderating effect of trauma exposure or PTSD for women in influencing whether or not they get a gun. Lastly, we have semi-structured virtual interviews, which last between 60 to 90 minutes, in which we cover these different topics. We ask folks about what it means to be a gun owner. How often do they use their guns? When do they use their guns? Do they carry? When do they not carry? Who has access to the guns? How do you store them? We do also ask folks about the relationship between guns and suicide. And again, in the next few slides, I'll share the good stuff, right? Some of the preliminary findings that we've gleaned and we've constructed from these interviews. And then finally, we ask questions about the influence of, if any, of state legislation and policies. So again, largely could not be as successful as we are without the assistance in recruitment and retention through entities at OSU. We recruited participants in a number of ways. So Facebook ads, we were able to administer or perhaps disseminate Facebook ads not only to folks in Ohio, but also women in New Jersey, which was really cool to be able to do that from Columbus, Ohio. We also utilized Research Match. And then we actually did some boots on the ground recruiting and posted flyers. That was a weekend long endeavor in which me and another part-time research associate, who is also my mom, helped me drive around and post flyers at different ranges, shops, and local community areas. Finally, we found that word of mouth was actually quite helpful in recruiting folks because people would participate, women would participate, and then they'd tell their friends or they'd tell their gun club. So again, shout out to the Center for Clinical and Translational Sciences here at OSU because they were incredibly useful in helping us get it Facebook ads and Research Match set up and creating really wonderful recruitment materials. So we're still, the study is still ongoing. We're still recruiting folks. Unsurprisingly, most of our participants so far have been from Ohio. However, we do have strong representation from New Jersey. We anticipate that for the next few months, we'll be prioritizing recruitment with only New Jersey women. So again, preliminary numbers, we're finding that the average age is a little bit higher, about 49 years old, with our youngest participant being 25 and the oldest being 73. A predominantly white identifying sample with only less than 4% identifying as Black and African American. 37% reported carrying a firearm outside of the house. Now, this wasn't considering whether or not they were coming from Ohio or New Jersey, so we'll certainly see some differences there in terms of who's carrying. The average number of guns in and around the home were about 9. So we did have an outlier, someone who had a really unique experience and had triple digits firearms. But we did find that excluding that outlier, we had about an average of 9 guns among our participants. Most of them had firearms in their childhood home. So this was something that was not unfamiliar to them. And most of our participants were fairly young when they first shot a gun or a firearm. So critically, I'm going to just highlight 2 parts here. Under half of participants stored at least 1 firearm unlocked, and just over a third were storing firearms loaded and unlocked, which we know is not translating into secure storage, and secure storage is associated with reducing suicide risk. So this also speaks to the implications. What are the next steps in terms of where these preliminary pilot findings are going to go? I am moving quickly. So a lot of women own guns for very different reasons. If you take away one thing from this presentation, women gun owners are not a monolith. They don't own guns for just one reason. They're not only this or only using and owning guns for that reason. So there's a lot of variety. Many of them own guns for personal safety and protection. A lot of them shared their unique experiences and what they think is different when it comes to men. Again, I am happy to share these slides. I know I am moving quickly. 15 minutes really does go by like that. We also asked women to share a little bit about the connection between owning a gun and their identity and how sometimes it was not congruent and sometimes it was quite congruent. Virtually all of our participants had been impacted by suicide. Fewer than half of them would trust a primary care provider to talk about or discuss lethal means safety with them, whereas many more were more trusting of a retail or range owner. And I would say this, and again, this is anecdotally, many of our participants weren't actually sure what lethal means safety meant. What would you change about your gun laws? So I mentioned some of these preliminary takeaways. Again, happy to share the findings and my slides with folks who are interested. But again, I want you to take away that gun owners, especially women gun owners, not a monolith. Many of them didn't know about the connection between secure storage and suicide risk. Women own guns and use guns for a variety of reasons. And we're noticing that women's practices in terms of secure storage might be quite unique, but it might not be more secure by virtue of holding an identity as a woman. Whew. I'm going to stop sharing my slides and leave some space for some questions. What questions might folks have? Oh, such a good question, Mike. And I'm thinking about a paper that you've written before too about PTSD features and how folks store their firearms. Yeah, so yes and no. What's hard with this type of project, not that it's necessarily cross sectional, but not all of our questions went into like if they had reported experiencing victimization, how it influenced firearm ownership or getting a gun. We did have one participant who shared the fear of victimization was the influencing factor in purchasing a firearm, though. Yeah, so we looked at Amy, you asked, are there any questions or did you ask any questions about women who are mothers versus non-mothers? Yes and no. We asked folks if they had kiddos in the household, whether they were, their children or if they were other family members. But we didn't ask specifically about the role of being a mother or being a parent and how it influenced identity. We did ask how the presence of kiddos in the home influenced their storage practices. All right. Well, again, I'm going to type my email in the chat. Please reach out with any questions. And I guess for the record, my favorite type of bagel is a tie between a sesame bagel and a poppy seed bagel. Thank you so much for those attending.